All
Right.
right. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Vision Train. I'm Alicia Sacred Heart, hosting Liba WS, and she's going to give us a presentation today on the Virgin within the Triple Goddess archetype. Liba, welcome again. So glad to see you.
So, yes, I'm super happy to be back in one of my favorite, all-time favorite platforms, because it always feels like family here. So that's beautiful. And yeah, thanks a lot, Alicia. I have made a couple of presentations already about the Sefer Yetzirah and its corresponding gods and goddesses. But after the last one, I had quite a few questions and requests to know a bit more about specific gods and goddesses that were connected to the letters in the Sefer Yetzirah. So for all of you guys who don't know the Sefer Yetzirah, and for those of you who want a little brush up, the Sefer Yetzirah is a very small text. It's about 1,500 words. So you were talking about 10 pages in a book like this, and it was an oral tradition, a hermetic oral tradition. Hermetic means to be sealed. So that's why often we have mystic schools that are hermetic. And usually people were hermetic because they were considered heretics and they were tortured and burned and looked badly upon. And so this kind of information had to be kept secret. So because of the secrecy and because it was an oral tradition, we just can't know its age. But it is a Genesis story that is attributed to Abraham. And we have to remember who Abraham is. Abraham is the patriarch of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And the Genesis story for those Abrahamic religions puts the sacred feminine at the center of the fall. It puts her sacred snake, her sacred tree, and her sacred manifestation as Eve at the center of the fall. And we continue to get this doctrine of how women should not be priests and we can't, we should just shut our mouth. And these things, even though we've worked through it a lot on this planet, because it had a big effect all over the planet, as we know, they still are in our bones. People feel like because it was written in the Torah and it was Abrahamic lineage that it had to be the word of God. And people really believe that. So it's very interesting to find a parallel story that is written, attributed to Abraham, but has a completely different Genesis story. And the Sefer, which means book, and Yetzirah, which means formation or creation, starts with a triple goddess. It starts with 3 letters that are called 3 mothers, and they're called Aleph, Mem, and Shin. And these mothers birth the first 3 fathers. Now, this doesn't make the sacred feminine more important than the sacred masculine. It just means that the sacred masculine was inside and now it's outside. It's just a question of balance. What was inside is now outside. It was once 1 and now it's 2. That's all. And well, in the Sefer Yetzirah, actually, that's a little bit of a lie because actually, it specifically says that the letter or the mother is the ruler of the father. Now, it says this only in the sense that, for example, Aleph births the father breath or the father spirit. It's actually a huach, which translates into spirit, but it's often translated into breath, which is alchemically very interesting, because breath is the father of air and water, which is the humidity. So there's a whole alchemical thing right at the center of this. what we have is these three mother letters who birth, breath, water, and fire. And they go on to make air, the heavens, and the earth. And we're going to see these parallels, but I had to go back super far, and I had to go all the way back to the Fertile Crescent, where the story, the Hebrew nation says Abraham was born, even though he is most likely mythical. Even biblical historians will agree today that he is most likely mythical. It's still where the story is pointed. We're pointed to Ur, 2000 BCE in Ur, when they were having a renaissance under the great king Namu, who is named after the great primordial goddess that we will see tonight, Namu. Now, I've done a lot of talking about Namu and Nama in the other two presentations, but she's definitely a very important part of this, but I won't go into depth in her tonight. And I'll look at the other goddesses a little more in depth, just because there are many of you here who have seen the other presentations, and I don't want to just be on repeat. Okay, so we're going to go to my slideshow, and we're going to have a lot of visuals. I found such nice, cool images. Oh, I'm so excited to share them with you. So, does everybody see my Aleph? Do you see this? Do you see my screen, sweetie? Okay, I see my thumbs. I see thumbs up. Okay, so this is the letter Aleph. Now, in the Sefer Yetzirah, everything is reduced down to letters, numbers, and their communication. This is verbatim from the first chapter, first verse, that the whole experience we're experiencing is broken down into letters, numbers, and their communication. That's it. Letters is our consciousness, and numbers is chronology. For me to have a present and a future and a past, I also need space. For me to go from here to there, it takes time. Time and space are connected. And so we have consciousness going through time and space. So the one, the great one that has no name, that has no gender, because it is everything and nothing, the one manifests into you and me, into the dream. And we call the mother Aleph is one of those first three mother letters that exist without mother or father. They just are without beginning. They just exist. And Aleph is the only virgin one. Why is she a virgin? Because she's not impregnated by anyone else. When we talk about the Christian Virgin Mother, she's still impregnated by God. So is she really a virgin? This is a virgin. These three mothers just are without beginning. They are a manifestation of the one. And in the first sphere, in the very first step of the Sefer Yetzirah creation story, you have Aleph, who bears the first father breath. And she is always the tongue of decree. She lies between innocence and guilt. She lies between evil and good. She lies between the pan of decree and she's the pan of decree between the pan of merit and the pan of evil. So she's always that arbitrator. So that's why when Alicia said, let's sync these in with the moon cycle, I was like, girl, you have something here. I was like, because she is the crescent moon. She is neither full or empty. She is right in the middle. And she is this spark. She is the breather, and the living God is the breath. And both of them manifest as the chest. So we're going to go to the next slide. There we go. So I want to explain the creation myth that is found within the Sefer Yetzirah, because we will see it in the historic Near East that we're going to study tonight. So in Sphere 1, we are told there are two names for each of the spheres, each of the first four spheres. In Sphere 1, we are told the sphere is called beginning. This is where it all starts, in Sphere 1. The other name is the breath of the living God, or the breath of breath. So we know that the breath of the living God lives within Sphere 1. You see, the Sefer Yetzirah is an enigma. The reason I'm breaking it down like this is because you have to find one part in one verse, one part in another verse, another part in another verse, and you got to put it all together. So this is why I'm breaking it down really simplistic like this, because otherwise you're lost in that text. It took me years to crack these codes, years, and dreaming for decades about it before I even knew about the text. So, but this is just listening to what it says. I'm not adding something here. I'm just really listening. And it says that if the breath of the living God is in Sphere 1, who else must be with the breath of the living God but the breather? Because you can't have breath without a breather. So Aleph breathes the first breath of life in Sphere 1. We are told then, okay, Sphere 2 is another story altogether. It's the Omega. It contains all. It's once everything is formed. That's another story. Let's go continue here. In Sphere 3, Sphere 3 is called water from breath. Now, this is very interesting because we know now that Father breath is Aleph's consort. He is Aleph's consort. She births him. And since there's nothing else, no one else, nothing else, no other masculine around, he becomes her consort. Together they create air, they create the angels of breath, they create all kinds of things. He's really her consort, but he's not just her consort. He also goes and he must impregnate Mem, because Mem, we know from the verse, I'm going to read you the verse, says, 3 mothers, Aleph, Mem, Shin, from them 3 fathers were born, and from them all things were created. From them emanate fire, water, spirit, breath. Now, it details it, that Aleph births breath, but we know that in Sphere 3 is called water from breath. That means that breath is the father. Water from breath, breath is the father, so that's the dad. And we also know that Mem birthed water, so Mem is the mom. So it meant that Aleph made love with his consort sister, which is another classic we're going to see throughout the Fertile Crescent. This is a story we'll see over and over again. So that's why I'm taking it slow right here in the beginning, because this is the Sefer Yetzirah takes all the gods and goddesses are like theater on top of this very sort of essential sort of alchemical symbol. But you'll see these things. So then the last sphere in the center is 4, and this is called fire from water. Its other name is, let me keep here. Fire from water. Okay, so we know water is a father. We know he was born from Mem, and in fact, he is Mem's consort. They create the 3-dimensional world together. They create all kinds, they create Earth together. So they are definitely a consort and a pair. However, if we find out that fire is from the father water, it means that water must have impregnated Shin, because Shin is the mother of fire. I know that's all really complicated, but it's all to say that the father from Sphere 1 impregnates the next sister, who has a new father who impregnates the next sister. Okay. It's kind of complex, but it's actually a story you see in the theater of myth. So it's interesting to find the parallels, and to find these parallels. I'm telling you, I had to go back to the advent of writing, which means it might predate that, and it probably does. So it's very interesting. You'll see that the parallels are found in tablets from around 2600 BCE. This is right at the first mythological writing. Okay, so we can go to, now I'm going to show you the whole idea of, before writing, of course, we don't know anything. We just see the symbols, we don't know what people were thinking. But I want to show you this incredible figurine. It's absolutely not from the Near East. It's from Czechoslovakia, but it's around 29,000 years old, you guys. Just absorb how old that is. And this archetype of a great mother figure with big hips and big boobs, like, I'm fertile, baby, I'm ready. They don't think that the virgin means she can't be impregnated. It means she can't be, fertile and female. It just means everything comes from her, so she doesn't have an original. There's no one who impregnated her in the beginning. That's all it means. So now, the Far East figurines that I have found are much, much, much later. And we're going to start around 6000 BCE, which is already 8,000 years ago. That's a long time ago. So we'll go to this first one. So turkeys. It's like a serious, she's scary even. She's like a tough mama. And the reason I'm showing you something from Turkey, let me explain to you how the area that we're looking at. When we look into the influences that the Sefer Yetzirah, when I looked into the influences Sefer Yetzirah had, they extended all throughout the Fertile Crescent and all the way up into Anatolia. Now you have to realize that we have now found, through genetic testing of Bronze Age skeletons and through linguistic studies, we found that probably people from the Fertile Crescent went up into Turkey and into European countries and then came back down. And so, and you have later, even in, around, I think it's around 2000 BCE, that the Hittites, but don't quote me on that, I forget when they come in, but it's somewhere around there. They come in from Anatolia, and there is a lot of influence, and we find a lot of their genetics in modern day people from that region. So Turkey, Anatolia is very influential in this whole, you will see in this whole region. And one of the things I want to point out is that she's sitting on a lion chair. Okay, so these lions, as you can see, you will see all the way into the Common Era associated with the goddess. Even the strength card in the tarot is a woman opening the mouth of the lion, so who has tamed the lion. Well, we tame the lion through compassion and love. That's how I see it. Okay, so let's go to, I'm going to skip, I'll come back to this 6000 BCE stuff, but I want to skip to, this is almost 4,500 years later, same area, okay? And she's still sitting on the lion chair. 4,500 years, this story is surviving. Okay, now this particular goddess is, and I'm sorry, I have to lean over here because I have my notes, is called, and you'll see why I need notes, Arinnitti Hatian Urusemu. Okay, guys. So she was a Hittite sun goddess, because, now by the time 14th, 13th century BC, we have writing, so we know who she was, So she was the principal deity and the patron of their empire, which according to Britannica Academic, indicates that it was still a matriarchal society, even up to that point. And her consort, the weather god Taru, this is actually a quote from Britannica Academic, was second to Arinnitti in importance, indicating that she probably originated in matriarchal times. But she was still, I mean, if the weather god Taru was second to her, which you will see is always the case in the beginning, because her consort is always her child, because if she's the primordial mother, there's no one else around, right? So let's go back to 6000 BCE, because there's some cool things out there. So this is same area, but right around the same time. So this one thing I want to point out to you that you're going to see all the way into the Common Era as well is the goddess is symbolized by two things here. Her holding her breasts up and she's offering them, as well as a defined pubis, which is in a triangle. So these are from Çatalhöyük. So this one's around the same time in modern day Iraq. Remember that, well, Ur, the city where Abraham was supposedly born, where the Hebrew story starts, is in modern day Iraq. That's Mesopotamia. That's where the Tigris and the Euphrates go into the Persian Gulf. That is your, your fertile delta right there. So same thing, you have same time period, little goddess holding her breasts up. All right. Now, these are really wild. These guys, same time period, found in modern Israel, and they look like little aliens. I'm sorry, they just do. Say what you want, they do. They look like they have these serpentine eyes, okay? And I don't know, they just are so wild. These are two different figures, often like those big Çatalhöyük women with their big breasts. There were tons of these things. They would find a lot of them. It wasn't just that somebody sculpted his girlfriend. They'd find these all over the place, and they'd always be holding up their breasts. Now, she has one hand on her breast. I don't know if you can really call her offering her breast, and she's completely mysterious. There's something, I don't know if any of you guys know about some of these ancient Japanese figurines getting way out of the Far East. Well, there you go. Alicia has one where she's holding up just one breast. You got it, girl. There you go. But yeah, this little one has little slanty eyes and big hips too. They often have very alien-like little figurines in Japan. That's just showing you a little comparison. But let's go back to the Fertile Crescent. And Syria. So Syria is right off of the Mediterranean, and it's part of it is in upper Mesopotamia. It's upper Mesopotamia that hits the Mediterranean, and it's where Ugarit is in Syria, in modern day Syria, and Ugarit it was a hotbed of information, because it's the first time we hear the name Yehovah, YHV or YHW, depending on how people want to spell it. So Syria is definitely part of the story. And you can see 6,500 years ago, still have holding up their breasts. And on we go. So this is Namu Nama, depending on how you want to say it. Also many, many, many. And she, no, I shouldn't call her Namu Nama because she is older than writing. But she was discovered right around where Ur was built. And Ur was built right at 3,900 BCE. So right at the time when she was around. And this was the popular goddess figure that was found in the area. So she was obviously the bigwig. Because there were tons of figurines of her everywhere. And so even though Ur was a very old city, you know, Sumer had its own history. They weren't an empire. They were city-states that worked together in shared pantheons of gods. They shared a lot of cultural things, but they were independent city towns or city-states, however you want to call it. And they got sort of trashed under some, they lost their power, and it wasn't until the time of Abraham that Ur was having a renaissance, and under Ur-Nammu. So I'll talk a little bit more about her. So when we do have writing, we find out that, and I will tell you this, sorry, this is in my face. The first mythical writing that we have is around 2600 BCE, as I told you. And one of the oldest lexical texts that exist on this planet is called the Pharah God List. And it's in this God list that we discover the name Namma. So she goes back as old as writing. And we also discover that we absolutely don't have any information about her on the list. It's just a list of gods and goddesses, okay? But in the Anum, I had to check the name, the Anum, we do find out that she is the mother of heaven and earth, okay? And her epithet, meaning her symbol, and often these were, well, everything was engraved in stone or in clay, you know, it was symbolic. And her symbol, her sort of symbolic signature, was that of the anchor, the great absolute, which was often symbolized by water. But it wasn't just water. It was the great depths that have no limit. It was the eternal, forever nothingness that holds all potential. And because of that, she could birth heaven and earth. And heaven, the actual word in Sumerian for heaven, is An. And the Akkadians called it Anu. And the word for earth is Ki, the great goddess Ki. So everything in this creation was deified. Heaven and earth are deified as Anu and Ki. Okay. So this is a foundation peg of Lugal-Kisalsi, who was a king in 2380 BCE. And you can see there's an inscription on here that's on his belly. And it says, for Namma, the wife of An. Lugal-Kisalsi, king of Uruk and king of Ur, the temple of Namma he built. So this is a foundation peg dedicating the temple to Namma along with her consort An. So again, we see, like with Aleph, she takes her son as her consort because that's the only guy out there. Okay, that's her first guy. Okay, so she takes that guy that came out of her, and now they're a pair outside each other instead of inside each other. She's the womb that let him out. They can be equal. Nobody gets jealous out here between the girls and boys. So we find out that she marries her breast. Mary's breath. Excuse me, thinking about Aleph. Okay, so this is, oh, you know what? I'm going to do something that's going to make my life easier. Give me 1 second. I'm going to put this right in front of me. How about that? And I'm going to move this little guy over here. Perfect. Now I can, this is much better. So another very, very early tablet of mythological writing from Sumerian has their cosmogony. It has their Genesis story. And like all of these tablets, they have very dry academic names. These tablets are called the IAS tablets, IAS. Okay, and they were found in Abu Salabiki, which is modern Iraq. They date to 2500 BCE. And this Genesis story, you can imagine the thrill I got when I read this, starts with 3 pairs of deities. It starts with, now, Namu is not in the story anymore. The story I told you the other night, Enki and Ninma, is the last time we hear about it, hear her name, and that's about 100, 200 years earlier. By this time, she's gone, okay? And Ki is the big goddess. So Ki, goddess of earth, and Anu, god of heaven. Enki and Ninki, who are the god and goddess of water and earth, and Enlil and Ninlil. These are the 3 pairs. Now, who are they? We know who Ki is. She's earth. We know that Anu is heaven. En is the prefix for a god. So it's like the Lord. Ki, as we know, means earth. So Enki, their son, is the Lord of earth. And Ninki, Nin means the mistress that is given to titles of goddesses. Ninki is the goddess of earth. Okay, so they are the god and goddess of earth. And the next one is Enlil and Ninlil. Lil means air or wind. Sometimes it's translated air or wind. Okay, so what we have here is heaven from Anu, and it says Ki and Anu, but we're going to get Ki in the second pair. So because normally you'd have the Apsu up there with her, with Anu. And you do, at this time in Canaan, they keep that sort of water goddess connected to heaven rather than the earth goddess. And so you have, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought because I saw that Alicia left for a second and it just caught my eye and I lost my train of thought. So what you have is you have heaven, earth, and air. What are heaven, earth, and air in terms of the Sefer Yetzirah? The first pair, Aleph and breath, birth air. The second pair, Mem and water, birth earth. And the third pair, fire and Shin, birth the heavens. So we are left, if you take out the original Hermetic source and you just get what they create heaven, earth, and air. So you have in this cosmogony, you have a god and goddess who represent this in the same way in the Sefer Yetzirah, even though it's not exactly the same order. You have the exact same 3 pairs, except that they're not, the 3 pairs in Sefer Yetzirah is even more essential because these are your, sort of what they manifest out together. So I was very excited when I found the ES tablets. I'm telling you, I was like, whoa, here we go. Another interesting thing in the ES tablets is it says, Enlil. Remember, Enlil is Lord of Air. Enlil has been brought forth by Enki and Ninki. Enki has been brought forth by the mighty An and the luxurious earth, Ki. But it never tells us how Ninki and Enlil got born. It just told us how Enlil and Enki got born, but it doesn't tell us how Ki, or Anu for that matter, Ki, Ninki, and Ninlil get born, which is the exact same thing we see in the Sefer Yetzirah. You start with these 3 primordial goddesses that just have no mother, no father. They just are a manifestation of the one. The one starts, it's like a lotus flower. The one goes into 3, which goes into 7, which goes into 12. And that's what we see also in the Fertile Crescent. So what happens over time is the girls get lost. As we all know how the story goes, girls get lost and we end up with the 3 guys. Here you see they all have little Taurus horns because it's, most of this is all coming from the age of Taurus and the processional, if we look at the processional clock, it was the age of Taurus. That's what they saw they saw the constellation Taurus rise on their vernal equinox. They saw it rise in the east and set in the west. Okay, so those are the three guys that survived. Now, Enki is very important in the story. Here's a picture of him. He's got 4 rings around his hat, which indicates that he's represents a god, number 1, because he has the rings, but also that he represents the number 40. Everything was done in 60s. In the Sumerians' numerology, they used 60. Anu represented the totality, so he was 60, whereas Enki was only 40. Each one had a numerology attributed to them. And you can see the Akkadians called him Ea, which means Lord of Water. Now, in the Sefer Yetzirah, it is water and Mem who birth earth. They make earth, they manifest as earth. So water, earth is just a manifestation of water. But the Akkadians took it, they said he's water. And that's really what stuck with him. He became Aquarius. He is the great one in the Babylonian zodiac. The great one was Ea or Enki, Ea. And you can see these little mermen down by his feet, and he's holding a sort of a flask of liquid, probably water. And these little guys have fins on their backs. So Enki was very important. I had a presentation the other night with very bad internet, and sorry about that. It was from the forest. But I told you how Enki and his wife, along with 7 birthing goddesses, helped their mother Namma birth the primordial clay, the prima materia, to make humankind. Now, very interesting story, because it's a story that we can trace all the way back to the Genesis story, where God picks up earth, blows into it, and makes man. And originally, this was a story that was the great goddess who contains all. Remember, she contains all, and she creates from her body this prima materia and asks Ninma, who is actually Ninki, but she gets tons of names, to clip it off from her body and to make magical incantations with her husband Enki, so that this prima materia can have a spirit and take on the load of the gods' work, because the gods are very unhappy that they have so much work to do. And so this substitute, and that's literally the word they use, the substitute is created. Makes me, I just watched Blade Runner last night. I'm like, oh my God, this is the Sumerian story. It's like the artificial intelligence has a soul now. And it's like, wait a second. It's really interesting. So anyway, yes, and that's a story that gets passed down through different cultures and through generations, and you see the whole goddess thing slip. And one of the things that does change is that, and this is important because we're going to have to address it in a second, is that the wife of Enki, Ninki, who is called Ninma in the creation of human myth, Ninma, Enki and Ninma, is called in Akkadian Mama. And I explained this in my last presentation. There is confusion in the myth, which makes one wonder if Mama is a part of another goddess called Belet Ili, or if she is a unique goddess. And the reason is that Belet Ili seems to be sort of the substitute Apsu, the substitute Namma. She's like, when they decide that in the Atrahasis myth, which is the Akkadian version, when they decide that they, the gods have had just too much work and there has to be a substitute made, they call in the great womb mother Belet Ili. Belet Ili means mistress of the gods. And remember, mistress does not mean the concubine. Mistress is the title, as Lord is a title. So this was the, mother of the gods. It's the mistress, this was a big title. And they called her in, but then they call in also this Mama, who during the course of the myth has a very sort of shady frontier. You don't quite know if they're the same. And after Mama has created the human, everybody's so happy with her that they elevate her name to Belet Ili. And 1,000 years later, and I told this hymn the night of the presentation, and when I re-listened to it, it was cut a bit. So I'm going to tell it again. This is 1,000 years later. We hear an Akkadian myth, an Akkadian hymn to Belet Ili, where she is absolutely the same as Mami. So a song about Belet Ili I will sing. Friends, hark, heroes, listen. This song about Mama is sweeter than honey and wine, sweeter than honey and wine. She is the lady of the womb, and as such, she is the one who molds the creature. She is the creator of gods and man, the mother. So here she has definitely been associated. And the reason this is important is you see this now, the same thing in the Sumerian culture. Now, the Sumerian culture, under quotes, is kind of a difficult thing to explain, because the Sumerians are referred to in a lot of these texts as the dark-skinned people, which implies that the person who was writing it was not dark-skinned, or they would not be identifying the other as a dark-skinned person. And you find their culture eventually gets assimilated into all the Semitic cultures that are occupying that region. And so, but their language and their imagery, the style of their work, such as seen here, is passed down. Now, this is still in their heyday. We're at 2,350, but we've already lost the Apsu, the mother Namma. And what has happened is the same thing that happened in the Akkadian myth, is that Ninma becomes Ninhursag. So Ninma is the midwife, is the wife of Enki. She's one of the three from the three pairs. So she's a very important goddess. And she becomes the most important goddess in their pantheon around this time, Ninhursag. But she is Ninma. And we know this from a myth about her son who wins in battle and decides to change her name to Nin, which means goddess, or lord, lady, mistress, whatever you want to call it, of the mountain. So often, to show the mountain. It's not just earth, it's like the mountain, Ninhursag. And this is how often Sumerians were painted, was with a very round head stylistically. And you can see that he's naked. When he goes in to give libations, he's naked. And this is very important, and I think really beautiful, because when we do go into the sacred space that we share with our highest being of divine feminine, divine male, one spirit, we need to go in naked. There are no secrets. We can't have shame. We have to be ready to let it all go and come in with our best intention and embody our best and give offerings and gratitude, And so I just find it really beautiful that they had to do all their ceremonies naked. So unfortunately, by the time we get to the Babylonians, the mother goddess image is really kind of trashed. Her name is Tiamat. Now, the word Tiamat comes, all the languages of the time did not use vowels. So the word Tiamat had to come from a word that did not have I and A in it, because Tiamat is spelled T-A-M-A-T. You take out the I and the A, and you get TMT. And this is important because you will see that the goddesses that are following in her footsteps are using the same base TMT. Sounds like TNT. And you'll see their names come up again. In fact, the great Canaanite goddesses, both Antu and, Asherah, had a name with this root in it. So Tiamat was, by the time the Babylonians, which is, you can see this is an 8th century BC cylinder seal. And by the time that they get a hold of everything, you know, the whole pantheon of gods and goddesses, all the stories, all the, you know, they gave contributions, but they also were the real beginning of the decline for the goddess. And in their great story, the Enuma Elish, which I read quite a bit from the other night, so I'm not going to do that tonight, we find that the Apsu, the great depth that has all the potential, is now masculine. And his wife is called Tiamat. And he is also known because they, in their cosmogony, also start with 3 pairs. They start with Tiamat and Apsu, which is salt water and fresh water. Then they get Lahamu and Lamu, which are parent stars or constellations. So you have the heavens with them, but it's not quite, it's like the heavens, because then you get Kishar, earth, and Anshar, sky. So it goes backwards, because the last manifest is earth and sky, whereas as we saw in Sumer, starts with An and Ki, which is the heavens and earth. Okay, so it starts with Tiamat and Apsu, and in their mythology, you know, they're together and then they separate. And when I say they separate, I mean that Tiamat and Apsu separate to make this idea of polarity, of you and me. And all of a sudden, because at first there was just one. And at some point in the mythology, if we're talking about a story which starts with one, you have to have that part which separates. And so they do that right in the beginning. Their waters originally mingled as one, but they separate, and they have a bunch of babies, and the babies are like out of control. Things happen, and I'm not going to go into the whole story, but we end up with a god named Marduk. And this very big, frightening god who has 4 eyes and spits fire and is difficult to comprehend, as it is, I quote that, difficult. It says even something even more beautiful. There's something like impossible to perceive, difficult to comprehend, or something like that. But Marduk is difficult to comprehend. He's a really nasty guy, and he kills his mother. And he says terrible things. I mean, when it's not just that he kills her, he says, you know, he kills her and says terrible things about her that he hopes that generations after generations will always remember these terrible things about her. I mean, he's so mean about it. But what he does is that his father, who is Enki, has killed the Apsu, and the son Marduk takes the mother's body and fillets it like a fish, and has you know, one part of the fillet be the heavens and one part be the earth. And so Enki has to go, and he has to measure and rearrange the whole Apsu so that he can put the mother and father back in, but under his conditions. And in the creation of man in this story, there's no sacred feminine anywhere. This is a story that is not good for the goddess. She's trashed, she's put back in her place, but under certain conditions, under the conditions that these guys want her. So it's kind of a very sad moment for Tiamat. Now, I don't know if this is actually a cylinder seal image of Tiamat. This is definitely a Babylonian constellation right here. And she's supposed to be not a constellation, but she's supposed to create the constellations. But this might be the battle where they go to kill her, where Marduk goes to kill her. So around this time, you do have, often when you have really bad things happening, there's also a bunch of good things happening. So you do have a renaissance of a new type of Namma. She comes back under the name Antu or Antum around the first millennium. And you can see she's riding on water here, you see, on that in this image. And she's going towards Anu. And there's a wonderful paper written by Paul Alain Beaulieu, where he dissects and explores a 5th century text, which is called the MLC 1890, and where the power of her name is shown, that she contains Anu in her name, which means that she contains the God within her. And the titles in this text give her are the creatrix of all, mother of all the gods, the totality of heaven, the lady manifest. So she comes back with full force for a while. She always keeps popping her head up. Look where she is tonight. We're celebrating her here too. So yes, it's hard to make her disappear. So because you guys are a bunch of artists, I thought you would really get off on this next slide. So this is it's Syria. It's the area we're looking at. It's the time period we're looking at, but it's quite different. I can't tell you if these are really goddesses because there's absolutely no information that I've found on them. And instead of the pubis, they have little holes. But I thought they were so cool. And you have a triple goddess over here. And this one looks like she could be holding up breasts if they were visible. They're very, they're more my model, like just like a stick. So I thought they were really fun. So that's 4,500 years ago. So here we come to the area which is now called Iran. And in Iran, they had a triple goddess called Pinikir, Kiririsha, and Parti. Now, it doesn't seem, from what I've understood, from what all the different things I've read about it, it doesn't seem to be that they had a system like the 3 pairs that we've seen, but they might have had a different system. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of information about them, but we see a system both in Egypt that will unravel. You'll see it over the course of the 3 goddesses. And also we see it in Arabia, where the triple goddess is just one from the 3 mothers. And then from, if we're going to parallel it to the Sefer Yetzirah, from goddesses and gods outside that center, which is exactly what happens in the next goddesses. We'll look at, Inanna is not a primordial goddess. She's born of a god and a goddess, like Isis, but they're extremely important, and they are the fertile mother. So it's another manifestation of the mother, but on a new plane, you see. So anyway, so these goddesses, Pinikir, Kiririsha, and Parti, were more that kind of model, that kind of archetype of virgin, fertile, virgin mother, fertile mother, grandmother. There we go. But I don't think they were planned out. I think it was an organic thing that happened. In their capital, the capital of the area was called Susa. The very oldest goddess was called Pinikir, and she was married to the storm god, as often is the case. And in further south, you had Kiririsha, who became much more powerful, ends up with the storm god as her consort, moves into Susa, and before you know it, there's temples for her and temples for Pinikir and temples for Parti, and people go to all three of them. There's no jealousy between them. And that was in Susa. And as you can see, they're very distinctly holding up their breasts. They have very distinct triangular pubis. You know, these are really things that are being passed down over thousands of years. It's amazing. It blows my mind. Now, this is same area, but a few hundred years later, and they've gotten into modern art. And so you have this little goddess with her pubis. It's very fine, but you can really see where modern art came from, right? Amazing. And now we're back in Turkey. That's where that big, tough mama goddess was, along with that beautiful sun goddess with the child on her lap, which was much softer. But by the time we get down to 1700, this is the style. We start seeing these front-facing goddesses holding up their breasts with big grins on their faces and big pubis. And so that's 1800, 1700 BC. I'm going to go back in time because here we're jumping over to Egypt. And this is a very powerful goddess, and she actually dates from pre-dynastic times. And unfortunately, I don't have a date on her earliest record. Obviously, they weren't writing about her at that time, but they were using certain symbols that were used so much that they could figure out it was her. And all the way into dynastic times, which start in 3150. So we're talking about, she predates that. She's, fourth millennium. And she, she lasts a long time. She's in a lot of the myths we find in the temples in Egypt. And at the Temple of Esna, we read, unique goddess, mysterious and great, who came to be in the beginning and caused everything to be. And then it goes on, the divine mother of Ra. And we do hear about her. In fact, I'll mention her again right before I finish. And but Plutarch, who is the Greek writer and philosopher at the turn of the very beginning of the Common Era, wrote that at her temple at Sais, which does not exist anymore, it was inscribed in front, and you've probably heard this before. It became very famous, and sometimes people say that it's attributed to Isis, but it's not. It's attributed to Neith, because Plutarch is the best source information for this. And it says, I am all that has been, that is, and that will be. No mortal has yet been able to lift my veil. Very powerful inscription. Okay, so this is a more festive image of the Canaanite goddess. Okay, Canaan is where we find Palestine, Israel. There's a lot of, Canaan is basically runs along the edge of the Mediterranean and goes up there towards Syria. Asherah was a great Canaanite goddess. And we first hear about her. Now, she does not resemble Aleph. She resembles Mem, because she has a consort, and together they make the gods and the goddesses and the creation and everything else. She's still a primordial goddess. She still comes from that place where the whole Genesis starts, but she comes together as a pair. She doesn't birth the first pair. It doesn't even say, you have the two, just the same way you had the three in the Sefer Yetzirah, you just have the two. So we first hear about her as Ashratum in a tablet from the 18th century BCE. So that's about 4,000 years ago, a little less. And she was so popular, and this I'll have to read because she was a consort to so many different gods, and that I have a list. She was a consort to the great Hittite god El-Kunirsa, the Amorite storm god Amuru, the Arabian storm god and she was even called Ashratu, the bride of the Sumerian god An. So you can see how these gods and goddesses over time, they morph, usurp, they change cultures, they become, okay, wait, you're the hottest goddess, now you're going to embody this amazing sort of being, or even that, what is amazing and what is this being morphs over time, right? So this particular goddess, like I said, she had a lot of lovers. Now, this particular image, these are all Canaanite sculptures. This is El, the husband consort of Athirat. I prefer to call her Athirat. And this is their son, Baal. And I just found this Canaanite sculpture. I have no idea who she is. It said Canaanite Goddess. I put her in there because she's really sweet. I love her little bird on the top of her head. It's a really nice little piece. So anyway, the most we know about this goddess is from Canaanite texts that were found in Ugarit. I mentioned Ugarit earlier. It's in Syria, in Ras Shamra in modern Syria. And she comes up a lot, and in particular in the Karat epic and the Baal cycle, which are both part of a corpus called the Tablets of Elimelech from the library of the high priest. So, and in these tablets, we find out that she is the consort of El. They have 70 gods and goddesses. They're the ones that start the whole Genesis, according to their mythology. And I love how there's one little line. El is, because this is also during the time of Taurus, so all these great gods that are coming around and being talked about during the time of Taurus, they all are the great bull. And so you can hear this when in the Baal cycle, when the great Athirat fluttered her eyelids at Bull El, the compassionate. She winked at the creator of creatures. And I love that sort of, human naughtiness that's in there. It's so different from what we get now. So now I was talking to you about this word where Tiamat comes from, TMT. And I had read this very interesting article by this linguist, David Samara. And he notes that in these Ugaritic tablets, that the mother and father are always entitled to Tahamatum and Samuma, which literally means ocean and heaven, and the ocean part coming from the TMT root. And in both these Ugaritic tablets, which are 1400 BCE, as well as we find that not only is Asherah, Athirat, and El called ocean and heaven, but also Anu and Antu, Antum or Antu, depends on the. So, you have these parallel gods and goddesses. Sometimes they shift around and take each other's attributes, and sometimes they stay unique to their cultures. It's really confusing at first to keep track of everybody. So yes, so again, she's not a true virgin goddess, but she is the primordial goddess for the Canaanites, which are really the closest link we have to the Hebrew nation today, historically speaking. So the Asherahs, these are little tiny Asherahs. The Asherahs were these little effigies of the great goddess. They were pinched in clay, they were made in wood, they were found, we know that they were scattered across the hills, and this was one of the ways that she was celebrated. And I'm going to read you a few of the verses from the Torah itself, because it shows us how important Asherah had been to the Hebrew nation, along with El, how important they had been, from these texts that are actually not trying to be nice to them. Okay, so in Kings 21:3, it says, "For he rebuilt the high places which his father Hezekiah had destroyed, and he erected altars for Baal and made an Asherah, just as Ahab, king of Israel, had done. And he worshiped all the heavenly lights and served them." Okay, I realized I missed an extremely important thing that you will need to understand this. Baal. Remember what I said, that Aleph births breath, but then breath goes on to create, to impregnate Mem, so that she can have her consort. Well, the same story happens here. Asherah, or Athirat, ends up being the consort of her son Baal, and to the point where she's often called Balat. And that's why when I'm reading this about in Kings, where it says that we're talking about a king that said that he was re-erecting the altars for Baal and Asherah after they had been destroyed, just like Ahab, king of Israel, had done before. These were obviously part of their heritage and their legacy. And but you see all throughout this beginning of the Bible, this tendency to try to get rid of all this stuff, of all these gods and goddesses. There should just be one. There should just be YHV, Jehovah. Now, it's very interesting because in the Ugaritic texts is where you find the first historical mention of YHV. In the Sefer Yetzirah, those three letters, Yod, He, Vav, are letters that are from the 12. As I explained, you have three mother letters who birth three fathers. Together they make 7 double letters, and then 12 elemental letters. The elemental letters are the directors. They do not have the same power that either the 7 or the 3, who are the most powerful, have. Yahweh is made, Yod He Vav is made with these letters. And in the Ugaritic texts, which are the oldest mention of his name, we find that he is the son of El and Asherah. And so originally, if we look back even further, there's been scholarly research that's been, he was probably a god of the forge. And he was definitely, became a storm god, and he eventually usurped all of Baal's powers, who, kills the dragon. We're going to look at that in the grandmother section. But, killing the Leviathan, I'm probably not pronouncing that right, killing the dragon, and all these things that Baal did, he basically usurps. But originally, he was just one other deity that was tribal. And all these gods and goddesses within the pantheon were representing different nations and peoples. And they had their just like we saw in the city-states with Sumer, each city would have a god or goddess that would be from there, that was housed in that place. So, yes, so Baal and Asherah, just like Mem, who sleeps with her sister's consort breath, She Asherah sleeps with her son. Okay, I'm sorry. I should have said Mem sleeps with her son Water. Okay, so, and let me go back to Kings. In Kings 23, no, let's jump to Jeremiah. Jeremiah 44:17. After, because I'm going to skip some of these other kings, because basically what they're doing is they're just basically saying, oh, yes, trash it all, and oh, no, rebuild it all. But there is one that's very interesting, one quote from the Torah in Jeremiah 44:17. It's when people started wondering if all of this destruction of the goddess wasn't bringing them bad news. And they started getting worried about it. So this is to quote the Torah, the Bible. We will certainly do everything we said we would. We will burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, and will pour out drink offerings to her, just as we and our ancestors, our kings and our officials did in the towns of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. At that time, we had plenty of food, and we were well off and suffered no harm. And because of this great dedication that obviously they were having a hard time getting rid of, because Yahweh wanted to be the one and only. He wanted to usurp his father El's place. And he does. Because in the Torah, we read that El is his name, right? That's one of his names, Yahweh's names. But even in the Bible, there's distinction, and we can read that El allotted out his inheritance to Yahweh, that they were two distinct gods. They were not one and the same. To quote, the Most High El gave to the nations their inheritance, and that Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob, and his allotted heritage. And another way we know that they are distinct is the linguistic Mark Smith, who wrote a book called The Origins of Biblical Monotheism. How did all this polytheism turn into monotheism? I mean, honestly, in the Sefer Yetzirah, all the letters make up the one. The one is, there is a one consciousness. But what is being said in the Torah is that none of anything like that exists. It's just, if you're going to see high beings, it's me and it's masculine. And, and so he usurped basically everybody's powers. And so to go back to this quote, so Mark Smith pointing out in his book that if the people had been if their deity, if their national deity had been Yahweh, they would not have been called Yisrael. They would have been called Yisra Yahweh, because he explains that this title Yisra is just indicating that they are people of El. So it wouldn't be Yisrael, it would be Yisra Yahweh if he was originally El, and we do hear about his name historically. You have to remember the Torah was written in 500 BCE. And by that time, even though there are stories that you can find, like Noah and the Ark and the story of Babel and the creation of man, there's a whole bunch of stories you can find in Sumerian mythology. It was written down from the scribe's point of view in the 5th century. These are not tablets that were found at the time that they were written. And if we really want to know how people thought way back then, we have to go to the tablets that were written at the time. And at that time, 1,000 years before the Torah was written down, Yahweh was the son of Asherah and El. Just like in the Sefer Yetzirah, he is the son of 3 mothers and fathers. So Now, this is very interesting. Here we see again this very Mesopotamian Canaanite style of the goddess looking straight forward, but it has the head of Hathor, who is an Egyptian goddess, who normally is seen by profile. Of course, if you think about Egyptian art, they're all in profile. But it's very interesting because the Egyptians took the triple goddess we're going to look at, meaning Asherah, Astarte, who's Inanna, and Anat, who's the grandmother, sort of. She's definitely death and rebirth. And they morphed her into a triple goddess called Qadesh. And Qadesh sounds like and comes from the Hebrew word kadosh, katosh, kadosh. There's a whole bunch of pronunciations of it, which means holy. So she, this triple goddess, and we'll look as we progress in the next presentations, we'll look at some of the steles of the triple goddess where this triple goddess was given to Set. That's a whole nother story. So yes, so even Asherah was assimilated into a triple goddess seen by the Egyptians, and not only seen by the Egyptians, but the Arabs as well. Now, the unfortunate thing is that the advent of Islam, all the idols and all the stuff, all the historical tablets and figurines and everything was destroyed. We have very little information. And we do have some texts from people that wrote about it, and we will be looking into those in the next presentations. But this last slide shows an Arabian goddess who is actually, they use the same as the Egyptian, these three Canaanite goddesses as this triple goddess, and she's called El-Lat. Now you can see she has the lion by her, and later you'll see that usually Ishtar and Inanna are riding on a lion, and so she's often been associated with Ishtar, but this is absolutely erroneous because we do have ancient literature that talks about the triple goddess, and these three goddesses, El-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, were worshipped at the same time. They were at the holy, where all the Muslims go to Mecca, they go to this big stone called it's called the Qadesh. I'm so sorry, I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, and they all circumvent it and go round and round and round in circles. Well, in ancient times, before Islam, it was the home of the grandmother, and that's why we'll really look at it at that time. And she and Al-Uzza and El-Lat were worshipped there together, and they would circumvent it, giving praise to the three goddesses. And we know this because in the Book of Idols, written at the time of Muhammad, we have this story about how the locals would do that. And but that we'll get into more during the grandmother. But because these were ruined, we can only find pictures of her that were imported. Like, when we, like as painters, we get influenced by all these different cultures, and we get influenced by so many different things. Well, the same thing was happening back then, it's just people. And so you have a very Greco-Greek kind of style here with El-Lat. And she obviously was not made in Arabia, but she is the same El-Lat. And that's my last slide. And we will get into Inanna and Ishtar and Astarte and eventually the grandma and Manat, and we'll look at some of the images where the three are together in the following presentations. So I'm going to stop my screen share, and voila.
Et voilà, c'est magnifique. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys for sharing the space with me where we can celebrate this amazing history that we have, you know, her story, this human story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating, and the images that you put together were also fabulous to just look at. But you know, the way you have put it together and you tell the story is really a pleasure, Liba. Thank
Oh,
you.
brownie points forever, my sister.
Yeah, I can't wait. Next week is the second
Yes,
presentation, a week from today at the same time, and that one will be.
the fertile mother. Yeah, the fertile mother with her, you know, she is a double letter in the Sefer Yetzirah, and she is Inanna, who became also so important. She was queen of the heavens. Yeah, beautiful. And with her wonderful consort Tammuz, who is a month in the Hebrew calendar. He's the month of June.
And that will be with the full moon.
Yeah, that'll be with the full moon because she's full of fertility. She's like shamelessly full of love and fertility and the whole shebang. Great.
I love it. She's like, impregnate me.
She really is.
Yeah.
She is, and I'm going to even read you a few of her hymns. I've got like some hymns from her, very old hymns that are just incredible. They always blow my mind.
Oh, goody. I can't wait.
Yeah.
You know, I really would like to open this up for a discussion and, you know, just a little conversation together. If anybody else would like to, you know, have a little chat with Liba about this subject matter. Would you guys like to take a quick break before going into that, or should we just open it up?
Maybe I'll take a pee-pee break before
Yes.
we
Okay.
go into that. But I just want to answer Hazel Carlson because I'm looking at the I'm looking at this chat right now for the first time. And yes, Hazel, thank you so much. I am actually been writing this book about the Sefer Yetzirah for like 3-4 years. So it's definitely on its way. And I'm supposedly in the edit stage, but the more, you know, I find images and layout and find out more parallels and things like this, the book keeps growing. So I don't know if it'll ever be published at this point. No, I'm just kidding. But the whole first part of the book is actually about the symbol. And the symbol is all described in the Sefer Yetzirah. But like everything in that text, it's an enigma. So you have to put together all the pieces from all the different chapters and then put it all together. And that, once the book is getting ready to be published, I'm going to do a thing on the symbol, because the symbol, what they're describing with the symbol is that the symbol of the one that is in the dream of you and me is made up of these 22 letters and 10 spheres. And this is the base of all Kabbalistic trees. Cordovero in the Renaissance wrote a very famous book called Pardes Rimomen. And in this book, he puts together the first Kabbalistic tree, which is based on 22 letters and 10 spheres and their communication. But it's by that time a totally different system, because there is this school of Kabbalism that is drawing on ancient knowledge. By that time, the Sefer Yetzirah is ancient knowledge. And it's drawing on the Bahir and the Sefer Yetzirah and the Zohar, which is much later, but extremely important and central to Kabbalism. And so when the Sefer Yetzirah's story got filtered through all these different stories and things like this, the tree he came up with does not correspond to the text of the Sefer Yetzirah. And when I was studying it, I just kept saying, oh my God, this just doesn't work. Is it me? Is it no, but it has to do this, but it has to do that, but it has to do this. And all of a sudden I'm like, wait a second, I've been dreaming that there's something that does this. And all of a sudden I started realizing like, oh my God, this is something that I am so excited to share with you guys. And I've been keeping it a secret for a few years now. Dying to let it out of the bag, but I had to film it. Not only made a book, I made a little film with it. So I want everything perfect. So when I put it out, it's like really clear because it's super complex. It's not, but it is. So I want it as clear and easy to understand as possible.
Well, you touched on something that I really want to, if you're willing, I really want to dive into, and that's your dream connections with the unfolding of this. But first, let's take a little break.
Yes,
I'll throw in a little bit of music. We'll take a little break, and then we're going to dive in.
Perfect. And my husband said he gave me a little thing of food. He's trying to fatten me up so that I look more, the Turkish goddesses rather than the Canaanite goddesses, or somewhere in between. Okay.
Oh, I love it. All right.